I'm most proud of having a very good staff and very good people. We had a lot of fun. They were all happy to represent that industry. I moved the office to Georgetown. When we got there, I created a room that was to be a candy store. So our members would send us candy and we made it look like a store. We put it all up on shelves and there were little bags in there and people could come in and just go in and get a bunch of free samples. Like the FedEx guy, I think he came every day, and congressmen would want to have their fundraisers there because the whole office was kind of decorated with candy art and that sort of thing.
This is Associations Thrive, the podcast celebrating successful associations and their leaders. I'm your host, Joanna Pineda, CEO and Chief Troublemaker at Matrix Group International. Listen in as top association executives tell all, revealing the creative and innovative ways they're increasing membership, generating revenue, nurturing engagement, and reimagining their organizations. By the way, if you've launched a new initiative, created new member services, or updated your governance structure and are seeing great results, I want to hear your story, and so do my listeners. I'd love to have you as a guest. Go to podcast.matrixgroup.net and apply to be on Associations Thrive. Now let's dive into this week's show. Today, I'm speaking with Larry Graham, former president of the National Confectioners Association, or NCA. Larry, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. I'm always happy to talk about candy.
Well, I love candy and I love chocolate. So tell us about NCA. And I want to tell my listeners, you're the former president. You retired in 2014, but you and I met at a party because one of my closest friends is your neighbor. And I was so enchanted with your story. I said, Larry, I have to have you in the podcast. So we had a lot to talk about, but tell us about NCA.
Well, NCA has been around for a long time, since 1884. And originally it was located in Chicago, but then they realized the importance of the U.S. government, and they moved in the early 60s to D.C. We represent about 500 candy companies. We also represent brokers. If you're a small candy company, you don't have a national sales force, so you hire brokers. And we also represent machinery companies, and probably about 100 of them, who make machinery or supplies, peanuts, flour, sugar, for the industry. It's been around for a long time. Like many associations, we have 2 or 3 really big companies, and the rest are family companies for the most part. So Mars, Hershey, and Nestle would be my biggest members. And then the rest all over the United States are small family companies. We also have, because of our trade show, we have a number of foreign candy companies trying to sell candy or chocolate in the United States. One interesting thing, when we first had our trade show, we called it the All Candy Expo. But we realized to Europeans, the word candy doesn't mean chocolate. It means hard candy.
Oh, interesting.
So we eventually switched the name.
So Larry, how do you define candy and who's eligible to become a member?
We always had a big, long, complicated definition about that, where it was sold in the candy aisle, not the bakery aisle, the contents of the product. For example, one year, Kellogg's came to us and said, we'd like to put our Rice Krispie little bar.
The Rice Krispie treats, right?
Yeah, into your show. And when we looked at it, it was sold in the cookie aisle. We said, no, we don't think you're eligible. So the next year they came to us and they had the same bar, but it was coated in chocolate. So we said, okay, you're a candy.
So, Larry, the website says that NCA members make chocolate, candy, gum, and mints.
Yes.
So that's the definition of candy?
Yes.
Chocolate, candy, gum, and mints. So definitely not cookies.
Not cookies, although some of the bigger companies have cookies as a product, because cookies then starts to get us into, do we have cupcakes? Do we have little Debbie's? I mean, eventually, about trade shows.
Right, right.
You don't want to have so many things there and too many things, because then companies will say, hey, I went to your trade show, but I hardly saw a buyer because the show was so big.
I see. Okay.
Because of anything, the retail side of the business, if it stays around the same size, but even there's been a lot of mergers and acquisitions on the retail side. So the retail side, while it's still strong and important, doesn't necessarily grow the same way if you keep adding all these products. We've tried to stick with candy, and that's why now it's called Sweets and Snacks Expo.
So, Larry, how big is the candy industry? I don't know if you have the latest stats, but it's big business, isn't it?
It's big. I mean, worldwide, it's probably 200 billion. In the US, it's around 50 billion.
Okay.
In Europe, it's probably similar, 50 billion for all of Europe.
Well, Larry, we're going to talk about NCA in a second, but I want to dive into your story because you got a really interesting background. You were the NCA for 22 years, but you did a lot of other stuff. So first of all, how did you get started with associations? How did you even find associations?
Well, I graduated from law school and I got a job with a Wall Street law firm. And the firm sent me to Washington for a temporary assignment. And that was 40, 50 years ago. I'm still here on the temporary assignment. So I did this temporary thing, which actually is something similar that's going on now. But Nixon put together what he called a council to study the government agencies and make recommendations about should they be modernized, changed, done away with, whatever.
Wow.
I did that for 6 months, and I was about to go back to New York when a congressman had called the council and said, I'm not a lawyer. Do you have anybody there that would be interested in working up here on Capitol Hill? So I interviewed with the congressman and got the job. I called my law firm. I said, can I have a little longer time to decide whether I continue with you? And they said, yes. So I worked for Congressman Clarence Brown from Ohio. I always remember in the interview, he said to me at the end of the interview, have you ever been to Ohio? I said, no, but I know where it is.
Okay. And you got the job.
I got the job. So I was the chief of staff to Congressman Clarence Brown, whose dad had been a congressman for 25 years before him. So that got me involved in the Congress. At the end of that, the law firm still held my job open, but by then I thought I'm going to stay here. I didn't want a career on Capitol Hill, but I did like it there for the time being, and it was an interesting job. So when I was thinking of leaving, which was after a couple of years, somebody said to me, there's an association here that's looking for a Washington, D.C. employee. They were based in New York City. It was the American Hotel and Lodging Association.
Oh, I know them, right.
So they represented all the hotels and major motel chains in the country. And that started me in the association world. Then after a couple of years there, I went to an association with not a great name, but called the National Food Processors Association.
Yep, know them too.
And they started as the canners. And I was executive vice president there. It was a big group. They had 200 employees. They represented packaged food industry, and that got me involved in the food side. And then somewhere along the way, a headhunting firm had called me, Korn Ferry, and said, there's this job in the uniform industry.
Oh.
And similar to the candy industry, it had three big companies and everybody else was a family company.
Oh, interesting.
And then very quickly, I was only there a year. I got an offer through, again, a headhunting firm to go to the confectioners.
Ah,
I took that, and I was very sad to leave the uniform guys because they had gone to a lot of trouble and spent money with a firm and all that. And so when I got this other offer, which I just thought was a more interesting and fun industry, I flew on my own dime down to Florida to my chairman of my board who was on vacation. And I met him at a pool. And I said, Tony, I have this job offer. I think I really have to take it. And he said, wait a minute. I'm going to go upstairs and change and I'll meet you in the library or something.
right.
So that's how I started with the whole candy guys.
Wow. And you were there for 22 years. Well, let's talk about NCA. You retired in 2014. So clearly lots of changes and you missed the whole pandemic with the association.
Yeah.
What are you most proud of?
I think I'm most proud of having a very good staff and very good people. We had a lot of fun. They were all happy to represent that industry. I moved the office to Georgetown. When we got there, I created a room that was to be a candy store.
Oh my God, I visited. Tell everyone about the candy store.
So our members would send us candy and we made it look like a store. We put it all up on shelves and there were little bags in there and people could come in and just go in and get a bunch of free samples. Like the FedEx guy, I think he came every day, even if he didn't have a delivery.
Just so he could grab a bag of candy?
Yes. And congressmen would want to have their fundraisers there because the whole office was kind of decorated with candy art and that sort of thing. We had at our trade show a guy who made all kinds of things out of chocolate. For example, dresses out of chocolate.
Oh.
And bowls, beautiful bowls, and all these things he could do with chocolate. And it really had nothing to do with the selling of candy and chocolate, but it just added a little fun to going to the trade show.
Well, bowls, I understand, but like putting on a dress of chocolate might be a little challenging, especially as it starts to melt.
That's true. As you may know, chocolate melts at the temperature of your body.
Right.
One reason it melts in your mouth. So, yeah, you'd have to be kind of frozen a little bit.
Well, Larry, you say that the trade show Sweets and Snacks really changed the industry, and that happened during your tenure.
Yes.
So what do you mean by that?
Well, if anything, certainly it changed the trade association. It was a major new source of revenue. We didn't do it for that reason, but it ended up to be that.
So did you have a trade show before and you started a new one, or did you expand it? Like, talk to us about that.
We were partners in a group called the wholesalers. And those wholesalers, surprising to hear this combination, but they were candy tobacco wholesalers.
Oh, that is a surprising combination. But you know what? Those are the people at the checkout, or they used to be.
Yeah. Well, candy is everywhere. It's not only in all the retail chains, it's at museums, it's in ballparks, it's in zoos, it's everywhere. And wholesalers are one of the major ways that candy gets to all those places.
Ah.
As back then in the 50s and 60s, similar to cigarettes that were everywhere. So we said to that industry, we would like to be in the show, but separate it from your products because it looked like the Sin Show or something.
Right. The bad optics.
Yeah. And they said, no, we're not going to do that. And we said, well, then we're going to have our own show.
Ah.
So myself and our executive committee decided that if we got 100 exhibitors, we would go forward with the idea. And they would have to commit to us for 3 years. And we got 100 committing to us for 3 years. And that started the show at the Navy Pier in Chicago. And the show continued to grow. It's now closer to 1,000 exhibitors. It's doing really well. It's not the largest candy show in the world. That's in Cologne, Germany, every February. And that was maybe 1,500, 1,600 exhibitors, all from all over Europe, including us. We had a US part of that show. But, Europe has kind of always been the focal point of confections and chocolate and all that.
Mm.
So that is, to this day, in Cologne, a very good show. They were always worried about our success, but I think they've come to support it. And we have a lot of foreign exhibitors at our trade show. But it did change NCA. It did broaden the scope of the candy industry because we have so many more types of candy coming here now. And people often don't realize how big America is until they get here. Well, they can't get here and drive all around America and visit with every candy buyer.
Right. Right.
But if you come to our trade show, you're going to see every major retailer there.
Ah, okay. That makes sense because the buyers from Safeway and Giant and BJ's and Costco and Walmart, they're going to be at the show.
Right. Walmart did an interesting thing at our show. They would bring a lot of people. They would go around the show. And in the afternoon, they would have meetings and often bring in focus groups. Like if there was a new kid product, they brought in 15 kids and tried the product out on them and got their response. So
wow,
they really used the trade show as a way to test products and test new products and that sort of thing.
Let me understand this. So Mars would say, hey, we've got this new candy. And Walmart would say, well, that's interesting. And they knew in advance that companies are probably announcing new products at Sweets and Snacks. So in advance, they would arrange for these focus groups so that if it was a hit with the kids, they would place an order right then and be at the front of the line.
Yeah. Well, it was a major factor in them going ahead and just doing research on new products. I mean, the difficult thing about a trade show is the buyers would come every year and say, what's new?
Right.
So we really tried to design a lot of aspects of the trade show that would show, hey, here's a whole new section of new candies, in addition to the booths that were all over the place. And eventually we were in McCormick Place in Chicago.
And I think you filled McCormick Center, right?
Yeah, I think by the time they started moving around, we always had the concept, same place, same time every year. But Chicago wasn't having a lot of trade shows during COVID.
Right.
So they went to Indianapolis one year. So now I think they're testing this out. Chicago, Indianapolis, Las Vegas, and then back to Chicago. So we'll see how well that works. It could be a good idea and a good way to go.
Well, let me ask you a question. So, one thing that ebbs and flows, Larry, is this whole notion of, is sugar bad?
Yeah.
Like, you remember Jamie Oliver, the celebrity chef? He was like, oh, sugar is bad. And then there was the whole chocolate milk is bad, white milk is good. So as the trade association, how do you not necessarily fight that, but how do you accommodate that? Because candy is sugar.
Right. And one of the major aspects where we spent our budget money was with marketing firms and public relations firms.
Okay.
So we would promote the category. The companies would promote their brands, but we would promote the category and really just emphasizing that it's a treat. It's a small reward. It's a very small part of your diet. And if you have a good diet, you can fit a candy bar into that diet. So how candy fits into a diet is one of our messages. Also, candy has 4 times a year that are good times to promote the product: Halloween, Christmas, Valentine, Easter.
Oh, of course.
So marketing firms loved us for that reason, because they could build on those holidays and say, you can't have Halloween without candy and chocolate.
Right.
And so that was good for us. I was always encouraging the Sugar Association to say, look, and all the studies that have done about sugar, there's nothing intrinsically bad about sugar in and of itself, except too much of it. And that became a big issue, hidden sugars and products that you didn't expect to see it. And we're certainly open with that. I mean, our labeling is clear. You know what you're getting, you know what's in the products. So, candy's always been somewhat recession proof.
Mm,
It's a nice indulgence during times where you don't want to be spending a lot of money on food. It's not an expensive product.
right, right. But when times are good, you want to celebrate with food and you want to celebrate with treats. So interesting.
Absolutely.
Well, I'll tell you, when I was pregnant with my first, I found an article. It was some Swedish study that said pregnant women who ate chocolate during their pregnancy had happy children. And I thought, man, this is just the best research ever, right? So, like, I had chocolate every day, and Larry, I have happy children. So,
That is great. We had a scientist tell us once that there's no addiction to candy, like people who say, I'm addicted to chocolate, but there's cravings. And that generally speaking, women crave chocolate and men crave steak
oh, fascinating.
as the top product in each category for cravings. Who knows if that's true?
Okay. Well, Larry, speaking of all this, if I visit the NCA website today, there's 3, 4, 5, 6 staff devoted to government affairs.
Yeah.
So clearly, as the trade association, advocacy is important. What kind of issues does NCA advocate for or against?
Well, of course, the biggest one would be the sugar program. Our Congress has a program that protects the sugar growers in the United States. Sugar comes from two main sources, sugar cane and sugar beets. And sugar cane is in Texas, Louisiana, and sugar beets are in the Midwest. And we've come close, but we have not been able to get rid of that program. We think that program keeps the price of sugar high and forces our members to attempt to produce some of their product in Canada and Mexico and other places. And we want all those jobs to be in the US.
Ah,
So that's been an issue. We had an issue with kids working on cocoa farms in Africa.
so child labor issues.
Yeah, it's a child labor issue. And we ended up working very closely with the International Labor Organization, which is part of the UN in Geneva, and the Department of Labor, and all kinds of groups that are interested in protecting kids from working on farms. Cocoa, there's no mechanization really to get the cocoa pods and beans out of the trees. It has to be done by hand.
Hmm.
So the families and kids work on that. And sometimes they're just not treated as well as they should be. So it's a difficult problem because we don't own any farms in Africa, the candy industry, but we buy and the industry buys all the cocoa.
Right.
Now, 70% or so of the cocoa comes from the Ivory Coast and Ghana, even though cocoa itself is really a product of South America and Latin America and Mexico. That's where cocoa originated. That's where it's still grown to this day. And all kinds of different beans are grown in different areas and affect the taste and flavor of chocolate.
Hmm.
And there's a lot more exploration going on about that now and that part of the industry. So those are some of our issues. We had other issues that, in general, the food industry has about labeling and that sort of thing. And we would join with a lot of our other food trade associations to work on those issues.
Well, Larry, speaking of all these different issues, you said something really interesting at the start of the interview, which was you have 3 really large members and then you've got a lot of small members. So when it comes to these issues and all these other issues, how do you balance the needs and concerns of these members? Because, like, if I'm a small batch candy maker in Pennsylvania only selling to Pennsylvania stores, do I have different needs than, say, a Nestle?
Yes. And the big companies didn't look to us for help in the marketing of their products or that sort of thing, whereas many of the smaller companies did.
Ah, okay.
Also, I was kind of back then the old-fashioned CEO of a trade association. I made it a point to visit as many of those little guys as I could, and they're all over the United States. So we would put together various trips. Usually a staff person or two would come with me, and we'd go, and I've probably been in 100 candy factories. And that was a way of sitting down with those members and hear what their issues were, what they needed from us. For example, at our annual conference, which is separate from our expo, we invited candy buyers to come at our expense. And since they weren't selling us anything as an association, they could accept those invitations.
Ah,
So at our annual conference, we have at least 100 important buyers, retail buyers in the candy industry who come to the conference. So that was an innovation that we did that our small guys loved. And even the big guys appreciated it. So that ended up working out pretty good and kept the association members as members and happy with the services that they got.
I see. Boy, that's really neat. Hey, Larry, before we go, we got to tell my listeners about your daughters. Please tell us about your daughters. One of them in particular is famous. And I know you're equally proud of both of them.
I am. My younger daughter, Maggie, works in the association industry in the American Gaming Association, and she loves it. And that's the reason we're here in Alexandria, helping her with her 3 kids and her husband. My other daughter, Lauren, lives mostly in California, but also has a place in New York. And people know her. She's an actress from the Gilmore Girls.
She was Lorelai Gilmore.
That's right. And then she had another couple of TV shows, and she was Adelaide and Guys and Dolls on Broadway and did a great job. So in the Gilmore Girls, if Lauren would have a lollipop or eat some sort of candy, was always kind of prominently featured. I never asked her to do it.
Oh, interesting.
But she did it, and it made particularly my small members really happy. So that was a good sort of secret asset that we had at the association. The other thing you asked me before about what was I proud of, 2 of my staff people are now CEOs of trade associations. Allison Boder, who was a vice president with us, runs the Frozen Food Association, and Liz Clark runs the Fitness Association. And they're both great people, and they're both CEOs and doing a great job. And I'm proud of that.
Larry, congratulations. That's quite the legacy in terms of the accomplishments of the association, but also in relationships, it sounds like.
Thank you. Thank you. But again, I think there's something about candy that we'd go to a meeting, even at the FDA and places like that, and we'd always bring samples. And, you're not allowed to give a regulator a gift or something. But we kind of always left a little pile of candy at every meeting we went to, and nobody rejected it.
But I mean, if a candy bar is worth a couple bucks, I don't think that violates ethics laws.
Absolutely.
Well, Larry, what would you say to someone who is thinking about their careers and, would say to you, why work for an association?
I think, first of all, it's a real people business. It's a business of conferences and trade shows and meetings. And if you like that kind of thing and you like to be around people, and I don't see how we could ever do our job really by not physically coming into work, at least most of the days of the week. And I think a lot of nonprofits are that way. And you get to represent industries that are really important to America. You get to know a lot of different business people and all that kind of thing. It's just a good area. A lot of associations are small and it's hard to move on, but still, it's a really good job experience. And you need people, you need marketers, you need government affairs people, you need finance people. So it has a lot of variety in a small little package.
Larry, this interview has been a real treat, pun intended. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast, and I will see you at Eileen's house.
Yes, I know. She has a lot of parties.
Yes.
Bye, Joanna. Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening to Associations Thrive. We're so glad to have you here. You know, my personal mission and the mission of my company, Matrix Group International, is to help associations and nonprofits increase membership, generate revenue, and thrive in the digital space. I want to hear stories of how your organization is thriving in today's challenging landscape. Please apply to be on my show by going to podcast.matrixgroup.net. By the way, do you need help with a digital initiative? Maybe it's a website redesign, a new membership database, or a hybrid meeting that you're planning. I'd love to connect with you. Please visit the Matrix Group website at matrixgroup.net. Thanks again for listening to this week's episode of Associations Thrive. Don't forget to subscribe to the show, leave a 5-star rating, post a comment, and share it with your colleagues and friends. Bye!